So Australia, let's talk about us.
Yeah.
It's rare that I read a memoir and love it as much as I loved your book. I think it's really insightful. It's both personal and kind of, it's beautiful and also really interesting as an Australian to read an outsider's perspective on it. Just sell us on the central thesis.
Well, I think the central thesis kind of starts with me grappling with my Americanness in ways that I didn't anticipate in coming to Australia, in terms of the degree to which I just trusted that individualism and individuality was a good thing, and the sense that I thought I had a pretty clear idea of what risk was and what I was scared of and what I was not. And what I found in Australia was this culture that was able to sort of push you into nature in a way that was dangerous and that scared me, and that required a loss of individuality that I think was initially confronting, but ultimately quite comforting. That there is still a sense of community in Australia, a sense of doing things together, regardless of background, regardless of partisanship, that I found really remarkable coming from the United States, which felt so divided and so unable to work across these dividing lines. And, sometimes I would tell Americans when they say, "Oh, what's Australia like?" I'm like, well, it's kind of like the United States, except things generally work. And, and that's a little bit of what I found. I was forced to do things like work, the sausage sizzle in ways that Americans would never impose on me to make me do anything. And so, the United States is this place that I felt had so much choice and so much protection for individual sort of choice and rights, that it made for a society that wasn't great at holding together. And, I wrote this book mostly during the pandemic, and I think it was really visible then. And for me, I just came to Australia and kind of rediscovered the kind of person and the kind of society that I wanted to be a part of.
When you say that it wouldn't have been imposed on you to work the sausage sizzle, is that a term that Americans will know, by the way? What a sausage sizzle is?
Absolutely not.
What would you call a sausage sizzle?
That would be a barbecue, or that would be, I suppose just grilling.
Grilling meats and it's
not usually bacon and egg and
no, but the sizzle component implies that it's at a community event, so it would be at a junior sports league, or it would be at some kind of a or maybe even we have it at elections here. When you go to vote, you have a sausage sizzle, and you have
one of the most stressful things I did in Australia early on was go to my public school kids sausage sizzle, and a bunch of these parents saying, "You get behind there and you cook the eggs and the bacon," and me handing it to these parents and me not knowing what I was doing, and them getting frustrated with me and me being totally clueless. And so that idea of not knowing how to do things.
Wait, you didn't know how to fry an egg on a
Well, no, but they had a particular expectation of how the whole thing worked. There needed to be a napkin underneath, and the roll had to be cut a certain way. And I didn't even know how much it was, and I was exchanging money. But that novelty and that complete desire, that comfort with being totally uncomfortable is something that I think Australians are a little bit better at in some ways.
Yes. It's an anti-snowflake sort of culture in a way, right? We're all just going to jump in and do this. But I think of America as having an actually stronger, certainly rural and regional America, of which comprises a much larger proportion of Americans than Australia does. We're one of the most urbanized countries in the world. That there's quite a strong sense of community and an expectation that you're going to show up at the little league, or the soccer mom is going to do drop off for the other kids. I find there maybe even more of that in the States than there is in Australia.
I think statistically that was true a generation or two ago and is not true anymore. Small number from the American version of my book. Volunteer firefighters started in Pennsylvania with Benjamin Franklin in 1736. At its peak in the 70s, they had 360,000 volunteer firefighters. Everyone in their community was volunteering to help each other. Now it's down to 30,000. And to some degree, that's a marker of how Americans have struggled to participate with each other in ways that are, mission driven, I guess. And at the same time, you've had this enormous sorting by political viewpoint. So people live with people who have the same political views. Maybe they volunteer at their little league because they trust that those people are going to vote the same way they do. And there is still community in some of these relatively homogenous partisan locales. But I don't think there's as much just being thrown in with people that you don't know, doing something that, is less about identity, And I don't know. I think that there's still less comfort with the throw your arm around someone and force them to do something they've never done before. There's an assumption that, you get to choose if you want to do this or not.
Yeah, I see. So what are some ways in which that showed up in Australia? You've mentioned doing a sausage sizzle, and one of the big themes in your book is nippers, which you can explain, but are there any other examples that you can throw in to complete the picture for American listeners?
Yeah, I mean, the surf life-saving clubs was definitely the main, thing for me and my family of kind of being forced into a frightening ocean and just expected to figure it out. I also had reporting trips where I did a story about this guy who was writing a children's story every day for 365 days a year. And he was a hardcore footy, AFL, Australian rules guy, and literally forced me to do training with him, like made me borrow boots from someone else's old uniform that smelled like a dead rat, and like put me on the pitch, and I did everything I could to try to get out of it. I was like, I'm wearing boots. I got jeans. I mean, I thought I had various ways to protect myself, and it wasn't possible. And then I got out there under the lights with all these guys who were at first like, who the hell's this idiot American? But then afterwards, there was enough camaraderie for me to come away from that feeling like I'd learned something and had a bit of a thrill, and then I was grateful for that. So that's one example. I also kept having things. I don't even know if I mentioned this in the book, but I had these experiences where like I was covering the fires at one point, and my car broke down. We had a flat tire, and every car that drove by stopped to make sure we were okay. We weren't very close to the fires by any means. We were just in a rural area, but every single vehicle stopped to see if we needed help. In the United States, someone would stop, but every vehicle, I don't think so.
Yeah,
I really
that's interesting, actually. I was just at the last school holidays, I went out to the desert with my kids, and we went on a big road trip, and I wasn't sure whether I'd gotten lost and taken a wrong turn, so I just pulled over to the side of the highway, middle of nowhere, flat, red desert that looks like you're on Mars, and just a 2-lane road, and I'm on the side of the road, and I hear a knock on the window next door. There's no one around.
Right.
And the bloke's pulled over behind us because he's just seen that the car's on the side of the road. He's like, "You okay, mate?" I was like, "Oh yeah, sorry, I just wanted to make sure I was going the right direction." "All right, no worries."
And that's not to say that Australia is perfect, and that's not to say that sense of community isn't fading. There's plenty of evidence to suggest that, Australia 20 or 30 years ago also was more connected than it used to be.
Definitely.
But it's
I remember saying, this is always what middle-aged people say, right? When I was a kid, things were different, things were better. But I do remember walking through the neighborhood of Sydney where I grew up, and even as a teenager, people saying hello to each other, strangers saying hi. I mean, it's like that scene from Crocodile Dundee when Mick Dundee gets to New York and he walks through, he's walking along, Broadway, and it just through a throng of people going, "G'day, g'day, 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 g'day," trying to say hello to everybody. There actually was more of that when I was growing up than there is today.
But there's still, and this is a little bit for Australians, part of the reason I wrote this book is I wanted to kind of say, hey, don't let go of this. Don't lose this. This is something that as an outsider, I can see is valuable. And there are a lot of ways that it can be protected, but it does disappear without work. And so I do think that Australians have to continue to work hard at that. And as the country becomes more internationalized and more diverse and has more different kinds of communities, the country still has a lot of work to do to kind of bring people into this thing that is Australia.